Galahad, acknowledge. This is command.
I read you, Percival.
Enjoying a stroll in the park, are we?
Nothing quite like a chilly London morning to stimulate the senses.
There's nothing quite like the start of a new console generation. It's a time filled with optimism and excitement. Gamers' minds fill with the fresh possibilities that the new hardware can offer. One could argue that we're reaching a point of diminishing returns with regard to the jump in power between generations, but still, there's a unique novelty to opening up the box housing the new system that will bring game developers' latest visions to life. How good will the next generation of games look? What new mechanics will developers pioneer? How much will scalpers charge before I try to take legal action? It takes months or even years for these questions to be fully answered, but before the new consoles even have a release date, without fail, we're inundated with trailers for launch games that aim to capture the zeitgeist and elevate the industry. The quality of these games, let's just say, varies widely. First revealed at E3 2013, The Order 1886 emerged as a flashy new experience to be released on the upcoming PlayStation 4. Developed by Ready at Dawn, it was poised to be a potentially huge new IP for Sony. Ultimately not releasing until early 2015, The Order 1886 certainly has the looks, but does it also contain the substance?
I must admit, you do move fast for a man of your age.
I'm not cares to be reminded of his decrepitude by a fair damsel.
The game is set in 19th century London, where you'll command Grayson, known as Sir Galahad in more formal circles, a member of the Order, a centuries-old clan of knights tasked with maintaining safety in the homeland. While there are myriad members that compose the Order, Galahad's closest companions are Marquis, a smooth-talking Frenchman, often preoccupied with his female onlookers, Isabeau, an incredibly fierce and gifted pupil of Galahad, and Sebastian, a wise elder knight who serves as Galahad's mentor. Together, these four individuals compose a formidable team who are able to quickly dispatch threats and execute plans. So often in games you're placed into the role of an everyman thrust into a crazy new situation, but not so in The Order 1886. Galahad is an experienced professional, and it's refreshing to embody such a veteran character. Every member of the team feels like an actual human, thanks to sharp writing and powerful acting. Marquis could have easily become a one-note comical relief, constantly fawning over women, but he's got surprising depth that continues to reveal itself as the game progresses.
I assure you, mademoiselle, that only the vow of fidelity prevents me from accepting your invitation.
Oh, Marquis, you mustn't leave now.
Unfortunately, my lady, my duty compels me elsewhere.
A game this story-driven will live or die by the quality of its narrative, so it's a relief that each player in the story is so easy to cheer for and empathize with. All is not well in this fictionalized representation of London, with a rebellion uprising threatening the safety of the government. Even more troublesome is a growing population of lycanthropes, or werewolves, who present a more immediate threat to everyday citizens. The plot follows our band of knights as they try to control these groups, but there's a lot more to be dealt with than initially revealed. Loyalties are tested as the fabric of the Order begins to unspool.
What is it? Who's Percival talking to?
No one. Just some old sod off the street.
Well, let's move. It's only a matter of time before the Lycans regroup and return.
You about ready? These things take time. Put him back in.
Beginning in media res, the story of the 1886 is surprisingly confident for an original IP. It's pretty gripping stuff. I felt engaged from the get-go, and only grew more invested as the curtain began to peel back. The medium of video games still has a long way to go before it's consistently telling stories on par with film and television, but The Order is a strong push in the right direction. It won't be winning any Emmys or Oscars, but it's a step above what you typically see. If there's one significant flaw to cite, it's that the narrative feels rushed. There are some big character moments that just don't have as much impact as they should because there hasn't been enough time paid to fully rationalizing the characters' motivations. The last hour of the game in particular feels like Ready at Dawn had to severely limit the scope of its vision, with the ending feeling entirely incomplete. I've seldom seen a sequel teased so blatantly.
Will there ever be a time when you will heed my advice, Izzy?
You know the answer to that question. But you would have to obtain Father's blessing first.
At its core, the Order 1886 is a cover-based, third-person shooter. It won't take more than a few of the game's 16 chapters to settle into the rhythm of snapping to a barricade or wall, peeking around periodically, and firing your weapon at whomever is unfortunate enough to be on the other end of it. On occasion, you'll be asked to employ stealth or pick a lock, but these instances are few and far between. Enemies will occasionally charge at you aggressively, forcing you to move around the battlefield, but for the most part, you can stay pretty still. If you've played a game in this genre before, you'll feel right at home. There are many different environments where you'll be engaged in firefights, but the mechanics of the shootouts don't really differ from one another in many significant ways. Grab a pistol, rifle, or shotgun, and get to it. The one area where the game innovates a bit is in some of its more unique weaponry, developed by Nikola Tesla himself. The thermite rifle, for example, fires flammable dust that can be ignited for a wide spread of damage, while the arc induction lance shoots an electric bolt that can kill enemies in a single hit. Despite being novel to try, I didn't find any of these weapons to be as satisfying as the more traditional offerings. If the action gets a bit overwhelming, you can utilize an ability called Black Sight to slow down and automatically target enemies. It functions a bit like the Deadeye ability in Red Dead Redemption. If even that can't get you out of a pinch, you can take a swig of black water once Galahad sustains enough damage to go down. This mysterious substance can heal most of the knight's wounds and allows them to extend their lifespan far beyond that of a normal human. It essentially functions as a single-use self-revive as long as you can stay hidden behind cover long enough to drink it. The gunplay in the Order is solid. The innovation is low, but the execution is sound. I mean, let's be real, it's hard to screw up the inherently satisfying nature of a headshot, but the Order manages to present a satisfying cadence of combat. Despite this, firing a shot does lack a bit of the heft that many of its contemporaries have already mastered. It's hard to understand without controlling the game yourself, but let's just say that this isn't quite in the upper echelon of third-person shooters. While the world presents a bit of a survival horror aesthetic, the gameplay doesn't reflect this. You'll never be at a loss for ammo as it's scattered plentifully around the world. Your loadout also often changes, so don't get attached to whatever weapons you're using. You can usually find and pick up your personal favorite in any given level, but disappointingly, the game doesn't offer any kind of weapon upgrades or progression. The game may lack survival horror mechanics, but that's not to say you won't occasionally have to face the game's more monstrous inhabitants. On multiple occasions, you'll contend with packs of lichens, and these fights function differently than your bouts with human enemies. Instead of hiding behind the relative safety of cover, you'll have to run around the environment shooting approaching enemies and dodging them with a well-timed button press when they get too close. Once they're downed, a knife to the chest puts them out of commission permanently. These types of battles are few and far between, which is a good thing, because they're just not as enjoyable as the standard shootouts. They quickly devolve into spinning around the room trying to see where the next beast is coming from, and then mashing the X button before they take you down. A couple of these encounters amount to the Order's equivalent of a boss fight, and these battles are even less engaging. They basically boil down to strafing around in a semicircle while you dodge and attack as needed, with some quick-time events thrown in for good measure. Speaking of QTEs, it doesn't take long to notice just how liberally the Order 1886 employs them. A little button mashing here and there isn't uncommon in games these days, but the Order takes it a bit too far. Sometimes it feels like the developers weren't sure how to execute a particular encounter, so they instead opted to take a less involved approach to simplify development. It's kind of a look-don't-touch mentality that feels out of place with the immersive world Ready at Dawn was trying to create.
3,
Can't even tell we're airborne when I'm back in the hold.
1.
Yeah.
And what a world it is. This fictionalized version of London is incredibly striking, from the architecture to the weaponry to the wardrobe. Again, the art direction here is extremely confident for a new franchise. This team clearly had a vision and executed on it flawlessly. Just as impressive as the art design is the technical execution, if not more so. It doesn't take more than a few seconds of looking at the Order 1886 to see just how gorgeous it is. Simply put, this game looks stunning, and the developers knew it, often prompting you to examine items and documents up close. Often the game tasks you with just walking through the environment to soak it all up before any combat ensues. The textures and lighting are believable to a point that someone who glances at the game in passing may mistake it for a movie. The character models and facial animation fully support the actors' performances, even small details, like the dust emitted from gunfire, further contribute to the believability of the world. All of this is even more impressive when considering that this game is now 8.5 years old. Contrary to the norm of this medium, it's barely aged at all.
Look, monsieur. God did not save this queen.
You may be asking, how'd they pull this off? How did Ready at Dawn manage to create a game that wouldn't look out of place if it were released today? Well, therein lies the Order 1886's single biggest issue, its brevity. Now, I don't want to discount the technical wizardry that this team managed to pull off. I don't even begin to truly understand how a video game comes together, and I have no doubt that dozens, if not hundreds of individuals put in countless hours of work to create the end result, but there's simply no denying that the Order 1886 is, shall we say, limited in scope. Compelled by that stunning vista? Well, take a picture, because you probably won't ever go there. Let me clearly establish that the Order is a very linear experience. Seldom are you presented with an opportunity to divulge off the beaten path, and when you are, you're not going to get very far before you hit a dead end. Ready at Dawn knows exactly where they want you to be, and you have very little say in how that experience unfolds. Now, I don't inherently consider that a bad thing. I've experienced some serious open world fatigue in my day, and I actually like linear experiences to break those bigger games up. The problem is just how short this game is, even compared to its contemporaries. Take The Evil Within, for example, which clocks in at anywhere from 15 to 20 hours on a first playthrough. The Order 1886, realistically, on a first playthrough, will probably only run you about 6. Replaying the entire game to capture this footage only took me 5. To make matters worse, there's very little on offer in the way of replay value. You can find some optional audio logs, but other than that, the only reason to play through the game again is to get another look at Galahad's finely tuned stash. There aren't even any difficulty settings, which is pretty low-hanging replay fruit.
Then you're of no use to me.
Do your worst.
Sadly, the brief runtime of the Order 1886 seemed to define the narrative of this game upon release. It received middling reviews, and while its anemic amount of content wasn't the only complaint leveraged at the game, I think that criticism in particular scared a lot of people off from trying it. After all, the game launched at a full $60 price point, which is a lot of money for such a fleeting experience. The good news is, 8 years later, the game's now only $20 and is often on sale for even less than that. Unfortunately, such price drops were too little, too late. Both the commercial and critical reception of the Order 1886 disappointed Sony, who seems to have shelved the franchise indefinitely, which is a damn shame. I really struggle to think of a game I'd more like to receive a sequel. To be fair, this game is right in my wheelhouse, but hey, the heart wants what it wants. If you think the Order may be up your alley, give it a shot. There is so much potential here that a lot of people slept on, which sadly relegated the game to that early generational obscurity. I imagine it may be a while before we hear from this franchise again, but maybe, by the time the PlayStation 6 rolls around in 2028, it may finally be time for the Order 1887.
You have betrayed our order! No one may escape the penalty!
You forget, Lord Chancellor. I'm as good as dead already.
Galahad!